Hi, I want to tell you about my book. This book has been a long time in coming. It's called Enough Light for the Next Step. I started writing this book 2017, but it actually had its inception a lot earlier than that. My late husband, Herb Nabigon, had written a book called The Hollow Tree, and he had always wanted to write a second book. So in 2015, we were talking with different people about getting his second book to print. And in February of 2016, less than 2 weeks before he passed away, we were speaking with the publisher, Latitude 46's publisher is Heather Campbell, and she was going to work with us on getting his second book to print. But that was not something that was able to happen. And after he passed away in March of 2016, I had in the back of my mind that someday I would pick up where we had left off. I had collected a lot of notes that he had dictated to me, and I had a lot of things to think about in those years. But getting started writing was almost impossible. That whole journey without him was really hard. So in January of 2017, Heather contacted me and said, well, are you ready to start writing? And I just decided to give it a try. And she coached me through some of the initial stages. Later that year, I moved to Vermont. And while I was living in Vermont, I joined a writers group across the river in New Hampshire, and I also took a memoir writing class, and I continued to send things to Heather and get feedback from her, and I worked really hard for a couple of years just to get this together. So finally, in about 2020, I was ready to submit the book for publishing. I had already had several editors read the book and give me suggestions, and it was a labor of love, working through a long journey of telling several stories, my story and Herb's story. And somewhere along the way I realized this was my book. It was not Herb's book. And yet Herb's voice is right here in this book as I tell the story. When I chose the title for this book, I drew on a memory of an event that occurred in my life in when the year that I turned 50. And my brothers and I have two younger brothers, we had gone on a hike in the Grand Canyon. I had tried hard to prepare for this 4-day hike down the north slope and up the south slope, but it was quite grueling and the heat was really exhausting, and I found myself struggling to make it to our first campsite. My younger brother went ahead and set up the campsite while my other brother and I continued to walk in the dark. He had a tiny little pen light, little flashlight, and he walked behind me and would shine the light at my feet so that I could see where to take the next step. When I think about the writing process, I remember all the way back to my childhood. Before I went to school and learned how to read, I had all my little storybooks memorized. And when I found out that I didn't really know how to read, I was so disappointed I wouldn't look at any of my books after that. But when I started learning how to read, I read everything I could get my hands on, including my mother's nursing books, her college English books, all different kinds of things. And of course, because I grew up in a Mennonite missionary home, we had the Bible, and there were other books and Sunday school materials, and I read voraciously. I read under the covers at nighttime. I read at the dinner table. I read when I was riding in the car. And as I read, my imagination was really activated. I entered another world. And when I wasn't reading, that active imagination continued to tell stories about everything that I saw and everything that I experienced. When I was around junior high school, I started keeping a diary and continued that practice. I now journal, but only occasionally. I don't write every day. And I know many writers say to be a successful writer, you must write every day. I don't. In fact, I probably have the worst case of writer's block of any writer that has ever existed. But I'm constantly writing in my head. When I drive down the street, I am telling myself a story of what I see around me. My imagination just goes to all dimensions. My career as a psychiatric social worker, I listen to a lot of people's stories, and I absorb their stories into my own imagination, and I'm able to empathetically place myself in their situation and try to find a way to connect with people. So I've learned through my life, we connect as humans through stories. And when we don't have our stories, we lose our connections. And if we want to have connections with people, it's really important to respect other people's stories and to respect our own story. So telling stories is a human thing to do, and writing them down is something that only a few of us really take the time and the effort to do. I have found that writing is the hardest work I've ever done. Being a therapist was hard work and I loved it. Being a university professor was hard work and I loved it. But writing is really hard work. It's never perfect. And there's always a million ways to tell a story. And how do you choose what's the right way? It's not just a solitary activity. There are editors, there are first readers, there are publishers, there are people who just want to hear a little bit of the story and have an idea about why they would or wouldn't finish reading something that you wrote. So all of that goes into the whole process of deciding what to write, when to write, how to write, where to write. I've scribbled things down on napkins in restaurants, jotted little notes down sitting at the red light. I've recorded things on my phone and gone back and typed it over again, and gotten up in the middle of the night and started writing things that I was dreaming about. But most times I'm not seriously writing except in my head. So that's my process. It's a little bit different than some other writers. I've gotten advice on writing a lot from a lot of different people. And some of the best advice that I've gotten can be summed up in 2 sentences, real short sentences. Don't get attached to your words. The other one is write what you know. Those 2 things I have found really difficult to do. I very easily get attached to lots of words. I can be a talker who just talks and talks. I once was accused of having my tongue fastened in the middle and wagging at both ends. But I've learned how to be quiet and listen. And when I listen to my own words, it's easier for me to find what really doesn't need to be there, and I just toss them away. And in the process of writing this book, I've tossed whole chapters away. I've learned that being attached to what I write may not honor the story the best way. And when I'm being true to my own story and writing what I know about, I might have a lot of ideas spin off from that, but I don't have to put them all in there all at one time. So that refining process is an important thing, to step back and get some perspective, to not be so sure that this is the only right way to say something. And the best help that I've gotten has come from people who read my words and say, oh, you know what, that just sounds like it really has a lot of hubris in it. First time I heard that word, I didn't know what it meant. And then when I found out that it means kind of prideful or arrogant, I began to be more careful about how I said what I wanted to say. And so those two suggestions of don't get attached to your words and write about what you know, that keeps me honest, it keeps me humble. And those are two of the core teachings of the medicine wheel, of the 7 grandfather teachings of the Anishinaabe people. And that's how Herb and I lived our life together. So I honor those teachings, and they help me in my writing. It helps me to just write about what I know and not hang on to things that don't need to be there. We don't have to say everything. So if you would like to read my story and are interested in learning more about Herb Nabigon and his story, and learning more about the teachings of the Anishinaabe people that he brought into our lives and that we lived our life by, I think it would be good for you to try finding a copy of this book. You can go to your local bookstore, your favorite place to buy books, and ask them to order it for you. Maybe they even carry it. I know it's listed on Chapters, Indigo, Amazon. One of the best places that you can go to get this book and other books are the Latitude 46 Publishing. You can just Google that, or you can just type in www.latitude46publishing.com, and they have this book and a lot of other good books from Northern writers. So I would suggest that you consider purchasing a copy for yourself and for other friends and family members. It makes a great gift, and it's the kind of book that you can dip into, and you can read a part of it and then put it aside and read another part of it. You don't have to sit down and read the whole thing at once, although I've had a few people tell me that they do that. So I do hope you enjoy it. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about how the book is constructed. At the beginning, I have an introduction and a prologue that describes a bit of what I was experiencing at the time when I began writing the book. And I was really processing a lot of grief and loss issues at the time. And then I move into talking a little bit about my early life, my relationship with my family members, and how I met my late husband, Herb Nabigon, the story of where I was at the time and how we began our life together. I also talk a lot about the teachings that he shared with me and what I came to know as the guiding principles for our life together. And I talk about the medicine wheel, kind of organize themes of the book around the different directions of the medicine wheel. I talk about the process of change, some of the changes that I've gone through in my life and changes that Herb went through in his life. I also try to share some teachings about the rascally side of life. That's what I say. We all have a shadow side, and we need to make friends with that. We need to understand the darkness in our lives and have a way to deal with that responsibly. So there are a lot of good things in this book, just about relationships, about living your personal life in a good way, and about dealing with grief and loss and finding a way to move on, finding those next steps. And I end with the story of the giveaway that we had for my late husband a year after his death, and how that whole process helped me to resolve some things and take the next step, which was writing this book. I hope you enjoy it.